Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Christensen and I am an alcoholic. And I'm delighted to be here tonight. I want to thank Ramona for asking me to come. This very much feels like a home to me because this is the meeting, one of the meetings that I came to in my very first few days of sobriety. In fact, I got a job, a commitment at this meeting. It was when it was over at the Women's Center, and it's really interesting. They needed they needed someone to manage the sound system over there. And I had a little bit of training as an engineer at one time, and so they suggested that maybe I could do that. And I said, well, I don't know what that has to do with sobriety, but my sponsor explained to me that that was good for me, and so I accepted the responsibility for that. And I did it for about a year. And every day, every time I would go over and set up the microphone and set up all the stuff, and then my job was to record the speaker and also to set the volume so that people could hear in there in the right way and so on. Now, there was a woman, LILA, who used to come to that meeting, and she had very sensitive ears. And if the volume was too high or too low, she would wait till the meeting was over, but she would come and give me a report on how well I'd done. And it was usually not particularly favorable. So I became distressed and concerned about this, and I decided that I needed some help. And so I asked my friend George, whom I met at my men's stag meeting on Wednesday night, I asked George if he would help me, and George very happily volunteered to help me at this meeting manage the sound system. What he would do is he would sit in the back of the room, and I would go out into the little area there where the sound system was, and I would set it to the right, what I thought was the right amount. And then I'd go in and I'd look around the corner and I'd look at George. And George would put a thumb up if I was supposed to turn the volume up, or a thumb down if I was supposed to turn the volume down. And he'd go like this if it was okay. And I'd turn the volume up or down or whatever and come back and look around the corner, and George would be, you know, telling me what to do. And I did that for quite a long time. But every time that happened, Lila would still come up to me after the meeting and tell me it was wrong. And I didn't know what to do until finally the commitment was over. They got a new secretary. We all had new commitments, you know, and I ended up in the kitchen with Jackie helping clean up dishes and stuff like that, which was a much more sensible job for me to do. I was much more capable at that. And 2 weeks later, George showed up with a hearing aid. He hadn't been able to hear a thing all that time. He was just being helpful. So you can see that I feel right at home here. This is a great place to be. I want to especially thank Dina. I thought that was a wonderful presentation that she gave, and I really appreciate it. I remember the first time I spoke at a meeting, and as a matter of fact, it happened to be this very meeting, and it was under the same circumstances. And I was terrified at that time. I make a living actually speaking in public, and it's still concerns me a great deal. I get nervous speaking at AA meetings because it requires a level of honesty. My sponsor told me when I went to him after that, when I found out I was going to speak the first time, and I was very frightened, and I went to him and I said, what should I do? And he said, well, you know, the one thing that you can learn to do is if you can always learn to tell on yourself, then you always have something to say at an AA meeting. And not only that, he said, but people will see you grow. They may not appreciate what you say. It may be horribly said sometimes, but the message is that you will be carrying the message in a tremendous way because people will be able to see you. And I've tried to do that ever since, to tell on myself. You know, tell about some of the problems and difficulties I'm having in trying to apply the principles of the program, or tell about some of the difficulties I had. And as a result, it's fared me very well. And so I appreciate that advice, and I'll try to do that tonight. I'll try to tell a little bit on myself, and I really appreciate being here. I was born in a small town in southern Utah, which by any definition you can imagine that you've ever heard is a religious cult. There's a lot of bad press about being raised in religious cults, but that's not my experience. My experience is that it was a wonderful experience. This was right at the mouth of Zion National Park. I used to go swimming in the Virgin River in the summertime. I used to go riding horses out in the desert. My closest friends were Native Americans on the Indian reservation near there. In fact, I have to take a sidetrack and tell you just quickly that I had a very distorted perception of history when I went to, because I grew up playing cowboys and Indians, typecast as guess what, with my friends. The Indians always won. There were more of them, and so of course they always won. So when I got to grade school and found out that the Native Americans did not always win those battles with the white folks, I was very surprised and absolutely disillusioned. So I got a distorted perception, but I had a wonderful childhood, absolutely glorious childhood. I can't imagine a better one that a child could have. And I think one of the reasons that it was so wonderful for me wasn't just the beautiful scenery, although that was certainly gorgeous. But more importantly, it had to do with the fact that my grandmother, who mostly raised me, believed in God, believed fervently in spiritual things and matters, and taught me to do those things. And so I grew up in the world believing that I belonged in this world, that this was a good place to be, and that I, as an individual, Chris, was welcome here in the world. And it was a wonderful feeling as a childhood, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that as a child I was taught to believe in God. And I did believe in God almost all the time. The problem is that there's a little part of my mind, in the back of my mind, that'll have no part of that. That little part of my brain is wired to go off and say, no, I don't think that Sunday school story is correct. I don't believe that story. I don't believe that God would do those things. I don't believe there is a God. And I used to ask myself from time to time, not often, but from time to time as a child, if maybe my parents were wrong. Maybe the training that I'd received as a child was really wrong, and there really wasn't a God. It's a funny thing about disbelief in God. When we're in the middle of disbelief, we're certain that that's the most important thing in the world. And when we're believing in God, you know, it's not all that big a thing. If you think about it for a minute, if you could rationally choose whether to believe in God or not believe in God, you'd always pick believing in God. Because what have you got to lose? If you're wrong, you waste a little bit of energy in false belief. And if you're right, then you're on the right side. If you don't believe in God and you happen to be right, well, then maybe nothing's lost. But if you happen to believe, if you believe that there is no God, and there is, it seemed to me you might be in some trouble. And so you see, it made sense that I would believe in God if I had a choice. But in those moments when that little part of my brain goes off and says, no, there's no God, then I become obsessed with that idea. And as I said, this didn't happen to me often. Now, I grew up, as you can probably understand, in a Mormon community, and they don't drink alcohol, and so therefore there were no alcoholics in my background. None at all. In fact, I didn't see very much drinking at all. We talked about it a lot. Alcohol is discussed by Mormons more than murder is. But I didn't see any of it. I had a cousin whose name was Callus. If you can imagine naming somebody Callus, you kind of get an idea. But that's a biblical name. And old Callus turned out to be the black sheep in the family. And the story went, he was somewhat older than me, and the story went that he had had a drink of Miller's High Life. A drink. And of course, he fell into bad company as the result of having that drink. And he got a girl pregnant as the result of drinking Miller's High Life. And he had to leave town. And he married her, and they went and lived in some foreign city. And I had a vision of him sitting in some gutter somewhere with his slut of a wife, you know, drinking Miller's High Life. Now, the reason that part of the story is important is I'm going to tell you right now about how I first saw some people drinking. I was about 5 years old, and my father decided to go to do some work he had to do on the Indian reservation. And so he took me, borrowed a car. We didn't have a car of our own, but he borrowed a car. And we piled in the car, and I had a day off with my dad, and this was a wonderful experience for me. I was so excited. I really looked forward to it. So I got in the car, and we drove off to the Indian reservation. Right when we went on the Mayapan Indian reservation, there just in the edge of Arizona, we walked. There's a little house that had been converted to a bar and grill. And the reason I knew this is because it had a sign in the window that said Miller's High Life. And there were 6 Native Americans out in that dirt yard of that little place, hooping it up and having the time of their lives. This is 9 o'clock in the morning. And they were drunker than skunks. And they were having fun. And I remember asking my father, can we stop? I want to get out and play with them. I'd never seen adults have fun like that before, and it looked like a good thing to do. And my father told me, no, we don't need to do that now. When we come back, we'll stop at that little place and get something to eat. But right now, we can't stop. So we went on ahead, and I played with my friend Billy Blue Jacket, and we had a good time. And when the time was to leave about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we piled back in the car, and we started back towards home. And of course, we went past this little house that's right at the edge of the Indian reservation that's been converted to a bar and grill. And we got out, and there were no Indians in the outside of the place. We went inside, and I got my first observation of what hell must look like. It doesn't smell like sulfur. It smells like stale beer, whiskey, urine, puke. And there were all these men that I had seen outside. They were sitting inside with bleary eyes. One of them was passed out. They looked terrible. And nobody had to take me aside and say, see, you don't want to do that when you grow up, do you? I knew that drinking was a horrible thing to do. Awful. So that's my experience, my first experience with alcohol. But of course I grew up, and as I grew up, an interesting thing happened to me. That little voice in the back of my head that from time to time came on and said there is no God started talking more often. In fact, as I reached adolescence, I found it was almost a constant companion. It shouted at me all the time, there is no God. The things you were taught as a child are foolish. You shouldn't be doing that. That's a waste of time. I went to college, and when I went to college, I wanted to be a great scientist. That was my dream. And so I took science classes. And I imagined, although I have evidence to the contrary today, I imagined that all great scientists were atheists, and so I decided to be an atheist. What I was really doing is turning my mind and my will over to that part of my mind that had caused me so much trouble over the years. You see, any time that little voice had gone off, it made me feel like it must be the devil talking or something. There's something wrong with me, or maybe I'm nuts, maybe I'm crazy. But what happened is in college, as that voice came on, I decided to listen to that voice all the time. And so for about 3 years or 3.5 years, I was a 100% practicing atheist. I would go to the bars and the little coffee shops at night and stay up late at night talking about Spinoza and Schopenhauer and all these other so-called atheists. And I had a wonderful time arguing the position of the atheist, and it was just great. And of course, we also drank some beer, and that was a pretty good thing. I liked beer. I even drank some Miller's High Life. And what amazed me is no girls got pregnant around me. It was great. And I couldn't understand why there'd been all this problem about it. Life seemed to be good when you're drinking and arguing and being an atheist. It's great. It's a wonderful life. Except there was a little tiny part of my brain, in the other side of my mind, that used to come off from time to time and say, yeah, but maybe your parents were right. Maybe your Sunday school teachers taught you the truth. Maybe there is a God. And boy, are you going to pay. And so, of course, I was caught between these two voices in my mind. And the harder I tried to turn my mind and will over to one, the more the other voice seemed to have some power, and it went back and forth. And I believe that that's probably going on in most teenagers' minds. I have 6 grandchildren today, and I've had 2 children raised, and I've watched them, and I taught in the junior high school system of Los Angeles for a few years, and I must tell you that I think that they're all nuts. And I think they're nuts in that way. I think that there's this stuff going on inside of them. But I remember thinking about what that was like as a kid, how painful that was, how difficult that was to experience all of that. And alcohol gave me some peace of mind. Alcohol calmed down that void, those voices. Alcohol made it possible for me to be calm and okay and sane. And it was wonderful. Now, there was a problem with my drinking alcohol in college, and that is that I didn't do very well in school. You can look back over my college career, you can look at my transcripts, and it's like looking at a road map of about which term I drank in and which ones I didn't. If I didn't drink, I got A's and B's and an occasional C. If I did drink, I got C's and D's and an occasional E. And you could just look at those grades and you can see what happened. It took me 5 years to get through a 4-year program, even though I started a year early. Because I drank, and when I drank, I ran into difficulties. And so I resolved to myself, I will not drink, I will not drink, I'm not going to drink again. And I remember over and over again getting up in the morning saying, oh God, this hangover, this is horrible. Oh, and I blew it last night, I spent money I didn't have, and oh gee, I know what I'll do, I won't drink. And I would try all day, all week, all month to try to not drink, and sometimes my willpower was strong enough, and often it wasn't. And if I could go for a whole term and not drink and get good grades, I had to celebrate. And the result was I got drunk. And so I began to know at an early age that there was something wrong with my drinking, and I wasn't normal, and I wasn't like my friends. My college buddies used to get drunk, fall down, puke, get up the next morning and go on about their business, and I could never quite do that. So I knew I was different from them, but I couldn't understand why. I thought I must be fundamentally mentally ill. Something was wrong with me. And so I went to the school psychologist or psychiatrist that they had at the student health center, you know, and I told him, I think I'm crazy. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, he said, the psychology department is doing some experiments and would like to try some things on you. Could we do that? And I said, sure, what are they? He said, well, we have this thing that we want, this new medication we want to practice on students who think they might be crazy and see if it improves their performance or whatever. And I said, what is it? He says, well, it's sometimes called LSD. I said, great, let's try that. And we did, and I'm telling you, I was off in a whole other direction. Although I am not much of a drug addict. I didn't do many drugs, even LSD, for very long. It wasn't very helpful to me. I am thoroughly and comprehensively an alcoholic. Believe me, I can just do everything I need to mess my life up with alcohol. I don't really need any help with anything else. But because I wasn't involved with other kinds of drugs, I was probably able to drink a lot longer than some people are today. And I drank for a very long time. I think a total of about 36 years I drank. I don't mean every day, but over that 36-year period, I was drunk many, many times. And towards the end, I drank constantly. But I always wanted to quit drinking. I tried again and again. 20 years before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my wife at the time was a psychologist and told me that I was an alcoholic, and it made perfect sense to me. I'm pretty sure I took her head off at the time and told her that she was stupid and wrong. But the truth is that I knew she was right. And I began at that point to try to quit drinking on my own. Now that's the secret of how I tried to tackle my own problems. And always have tried to tackle my own problems, as I've tried to do them myself. I went to the bookstores and I bought all the books on alcoholism, on all the books on self-help and how to take charge of your own life, how to be responsible. I still have boxes full in my garage of books that I purchased at that time. Tapes, videos, all kinds of things to teach myself how to not drink, how to desensitize myself to alcohol and so on. I had some friends at the time who had learned how to stop smoking at the Schick Center for Smoking Control. And the way they did that is they wired these people up. They wired them up so they got a little electric shock when they took a cigarette drag on a cigarette. And the result was they quit smoking, and it seemed to work for them. And I thought, gosh, that aversion therapy is a wonderful idea. But I didn't go to Schick Center. What I did to stop drinking is I built my own aversion therapy machine. Now I'm trained as a scientist and an engineer, and so it was a very simple thing for me to get a hold of the appropriate equipment, and I made up a wonderful little device that had a strap around my wrist and one around my ankle, and I would pick up I would pick up a drink, and as I took the drink, it would set off a little electrical device that had a certain delay, such that just as the drink was sliding down my throat, I'd get this electric shock on my wrist and my ankle. And at first it didn't work too well, so I turned the volume up on the electric shock. Now, I don't have to tell you that this technique did not work. And let me tell you why it didn't work. It didn't work because I learned to like the electric shock. So I woke up in the morning with not just a hangover, which was bad enough, and remorse and all that other stuff that it talks about in the book, but I got burns on my wrist and ankle I had to hide all day. But I was trying to quit drinking on my own. I couldn't conceive of going to anybody else. Well, I did try psychologists and psychiatrists. You know, you could pay them, and they had a responsibility to shut up about it and not talk to anybody. So I thought if I went to psychologists and psychiatrists, I might be able to stay sober on their advice. And I tried all of that. I tried acupuncture. I tried religion. One day I happened to be down in Dallas on business, and I was free for the weekend. I had a big long weekend with nothing to do, and I decided to drive over to Oklahoma City, where I had heard that there was a person who was one of those evangelists who could especially deal with people who were drug and alcoholic addicts. And so I drove over there and spent the weekend in Oklahoma City, and I went to this tent revival meeting of this guy whose name was A.A. Allen. 3 A's, A.A. Allen. I went to this guy's tent meeting, and he gave a big wonderful talk, you know, and then he had people come up to the altar afterwards, and he put his hands on them and screamed at them, and they fell down, and they got up and said, "Hallelujah, I'm saved." And I thought, that's what I want. And so I walked up to the altar, timidly I admit, but I walked up to the altar, and he came out and he put his hands on me, and he said, "You're an alcoholic." And I said, "How the hell do you know that?" And he says, "God is speaking to me." And I said, "Great." And he put his hands on me, and I fell down, and I felt so good, and we celebrated, and they gave me some books and places to send money and all kinds of stuff, and I was thrilled. I was so excited, and I got in the car and started to drive back to Dallas. And I made the long trip, and I was crying because I was so happy about being rescued from this horrible disease. And as I got closer to Dallas, these are the thoughts that came into my mind. In Dallas, they have special drinking laws. And you can't buy alcohol just any place. You have little sections of the town where you can go and you can buy alcohol. So I knew that if I wanted to buy a bottle of champagne, for instance, to celebrate the fact that I'm no longer an alcoholic, I'd have to stop in Arlington. I couldn't wait to get to Dallas, and guess what I did? I stopped in Arlington and got a bottle of champagne to celebrate the fact that I've been cured of being an alcoholic. And I don't know why you're laughing, because I'll bet you if you were truly cured, you'd go celebrate too. And mine happens to be with champagne. You pick your poison. That's what I would have done. So I tried that. I got back and tried it, and of course I was off and running again, and it didn't work. Over and over again, I tried to do things, mostly on my own to quit drinking, and I was unable to do it. Finally, at the end of my drinking, I reached a period where my body quit accepting alcohol. Now, I don't know why this is. I haven't heard of this common condition, that this is a common condition, but what happened to me was I reached a stage where for 18 solid months, I went home every single afternoon with a six-pack of the tall cans of beer and a full gallon jug of wine, and drank those every single night. I didn't eat dinner. I just went home for 18 months and got shit-faced. That's what I did with my life for 18 months. And at the end of that period of time, my body revolted and said, "You can't drink any more alcohol." And I want you to know it is the most discouraging and disillusioning thing in the world for an alcoholic to come to the realization that you can't get that alcohol down. If I could have injected it, I would have done it. I wanted to have a drink of alcohol so badly, but it wouldn't stay down. Every time I tried to drink, it came up. Well, I tried different things. I thought maybe the reason is because because my throat was raw. And if I sort of greased my throat with oil, maybe I could get the wine to go down. So my last drink is a cocktail of olive oil followed by vodka. Because my attempt was to get that alcohol down me no matter how I could. And it wouldn't stay down. I couldn't do it. And so I was in this incredible state of absolute, abject depression. How can I live? I can't drink, and I can't not drink. And that's where I was absolutely powerless. I thought about my life. I thought about what had happened to me. I hadn't paid my bills. My house was in foreclosure. I drunk up 2 marriages. My children wouldn't allow me to play with my grandkids. Girlfriends that I had deserted me. I had absolutely nobody in my life. I was going to be on the street shortly, and I was about to lose my job, and I had already lost my career. I'd been kicked out of the jobs that require security clearances, so I couldn't do those anymore because of my drinking. And I couldn't see any value in living. And so I did what any true scientist would do in a situation like that. I made a trade study. I sat down and did an analysis. And I came to the conclusion that the best thing for me to do would be to kill myself. And the method I chose of killing myself was one that could look something like an accident. Because even in death, I didn't want you to know that I was so much of a chicken that I would kill myself. I didn't want you to know that. So I very carefully planned my funeral. I cleaned up the things that were in my house, you know, threw out the dirty books and things like that, so when you came to look in my house, you wouldn't find them. So very concerned about what you think about me, even in death. But having got all that ready, I drove up to Big Bear, and I found a place where I could drive my car off the cliff by going across a lane of traffic. There was a place where there was a gap between the railing and the mountain next to it, just wide enough for my car. How do I know? I measured it. I took a tape measure with me and measured, and I was certain that I had 6 inches on either side of the car. Now I ask you, is this normal thinking? This is not, this is not normal thinking. But I had this all planned out. And so I got in the car and I drove home. Can't drink, can't really eat, very, very depressed. My mind, I wasn't even able to watch a television show all the way through because my mind would wander in the middle of it and I would get angry and scream and shout. And so I sat there and lay on the bed and thought about how am I going to go kill myself tomorrow? No problem. I'm just going to get in the car and drive up there and drive off. But like I told you, I'm trained as a scientist and an engineer, and so what happened is I started thinking about how long it would take for that car to fall down the cliff. And I calculated 2.5 seconds, and I looked at my watch and watched 2.5 seconds, and that's a long time. I'm going to be alive in that car being bashed around for 2.5 seconds. And I got very, very frightened. And I did an interesting thing. At that moment, I decided to go back to my childhood roots, and I said, God, if there is a God, I need your help. And the help that I want from you is that tomorrow I'm going to go kill myself and I need the courage to drive that car off the cliff. That's what I want. And then I threw in this prayer. And by the way, God, if you really care about me, you'll make this unnecessary by taking my life tonight. And what I want to tell you is that that second prayer was answered. God took my life that night. I am not the same person that I was that night. Since that moment, I have not had an urge to drink. I have not needed. What does that mean? Scared me to death. It went, phew. Anyway, that is really weird. Anyway, so since that moment, I have not had to take a drink. And that is the story of how I came to start looking for Alcoholics Anonymous. I woke up in the morning with an idea in my mind, AA. I thought it might mean American Airlines, but probably not. I looked in the phone book. I found central office. I started calling around. I got no answer at first. I've since been answering phones at central offices as a substitute for a long, long time because I really believe how important it is to have somebody down there to answer those phones. I finally got a hold of somebody who suggested that I go to the Marina Center. I went for 3 days in a complete state of fog, but I have been sober ever since. That was about 6 years ago, coming up on 6 years. And I'm very grateful to be sober. It's an incredible experience. What's happened to me in sobriety, though, is that things didn't suddenly get easier. I lost my job. I was unemployed for 3 solid years. I tried every single day in every way I knew how. I worked for 8 hours a day at getting a job. I talked to a lot of people, showed my resume to a lot of people, got advice from everybody I could talk to. I hired a specialist down in Orange County who place ex-executives, the placement agency. You pay them a lot of money and they get you placed. They had never had a failure before me. I am proud to say I am their first failure. They could not place me. In 3 years, they could not get me a job. And I know today that the reason that I couldn't get a job is because God was not ready for me to be at work. You see, I believe that from the moment that I turned my will and my life over to God, that I am not the same person and I don't belong to me anymore. I belong to God. And He has a different plan for me, a different program, a different place for me to go, someplace different, something that I don't even know about. In fact, He lets me know every day, after the day is over, what He had in mind for me. I do not learn what I'm supposed to work on until after I've done the business. All I can do is get up and have faith that somehow, if I turn my will and my life over to God, if I remember that I have already turned my will and my life over to God, and live the day out to the best of my ability, that what will happen is that somehow at the end of the day, God will pat me on the back and say, "Good job, Chris, you did what you were supposed to do, or you did the best you could do." And the amazing thing is that it's always enough. I've had some remarkable stories happen. I could tell you stories forever, but one of them I want to tell you is when I came to my 9th step in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. At that point in my life, my mother had cancer and was dying. And a couple of years before, when she first got cancer and was very, very sick, she had asked me if I could come and help take care of her. And I had told her, "No, I can't do that. I can't be in your presence that long. Any more than 3 days with my mother," and we got into a huge fight, and it was ugly, and I hated it. And so I couldn't do it. And so I told her no, and she was on her own. But now I'm in the middle of my 9th step, and my mother still has cancer, and she's undergoing chemotherapy. And so my sponsor told me, "Look, Chris, you're not working. Borrow the money. Go visit your mother. Take care of her." And I was able to go do that. She was very sick. I had to change her diaper and carry her around and do all kinds of stuff. And it was really an incredible experience. And the affection and love that grew between us, I can't begin to tell you what that was like. And yet, a while later, a couple of years, and she recovered from that particular episode with cancer, but she died a couple of years later. During a few years ago, many years ago, my brother, who was six years older than me, passed away. And at his funeral, I had gone to that funeral with about $300 in my pocket to buy the headstone. That was the gift that I was going to make to my sister-in-law for when my brother died. And I had gone out the night before and gotten drunk and spent that $300 on booze and friendship and so on and so forth. I mean, after all, if your brother died, you'd probably do the same thing. It made perfect sense to me at the time. And the next day when we had the funeral for my brother, my sister-in-law asked me if I could maybe step in and help because one of the pallbearers hadn't come, and could I help just for this one little thing. And I had basically known that if I had stood up too fast, I'd fall over, and get sick. I mean, I was really that hungover from the experience the night before. So I told her no. And so here I am in the middle of my 9th step, and one of the things that I did is I went back and talked to my sister-in-law and asked her if I could pay her for that headstone. And she said she didn't need the money, so I went and bought a headstone for somebody else that needed one, at my sponsor's direction. And here I was taking care of my mother, so I'd made some amends to her. A year ago, my mother passed away, just a little over a year ago now, and when she passed away, we had a funeral for her, and when we showed up at the graveside, one of the pallbearers hadn't showed up. And the funeral director said, "Is there anyone here who could act as a pallbearer?" And I said, "I'll be thrilled to do that." And I stepped forward, and they put a little flower on me, and I only walked about 4 or 5 steps. But I was a pallbearer for my mother. You see, what I have figured out is the person I hurt the most at my brother's funeral was not my sister-in-law, and it wasn't my brother, it was my mother. And here was an opportunity that God had given me to make an amends to my mother. And I knew at the moment that I was a pallbearer at my mother's funeral, or graveside service. I knew at that moment that God was giving me an opportunity to do something that I didn't even have the wisdom to ask for. And I find my life is like that. I had to, because I wasn't able to get work, I had to start my own business, and it's been really gruesome. I was told that in the business of management consulting, which I'm in, that it sometimes takes 3 years to get up and running, and it's been about 5 years for me. It's a lot slower than I thought. I always thought of myself as one of those real bright, capable people who could do things ahead of schedule, and this is taking longer. But one of the things I've learned about my business is that if I turn the responsibility for my business over to God, if I stay out of the way, then wonderful things happen. For example, in the last 5.5 years, through a period of unemployment and getting my business up and running and all that kind of thing, I made a contract with God that if He wanted me to move from my house, I'd be happy to move from my house. But if He wanted me to stay, He had to pay the bills. And you know, He's never let me down. It's usually the 11th hour, but somehow, some way, the mortgage gets paid. Now, I didn't make that agreement with God on my automobile, and I didn't always get those payments made on time, and I had to make some late payments. God has not missed one payment in about 6 years. Go figure. But you see, I have discovered, and the message that I wanted to convey to you tonight is I wanted to come tonight and tell you that I have learned that by turning my will and my life over to God completely and totally, that I am no longer the same person that I was before. I met a woman in this very meeting hall, not this one, but the one over in the other place, that I have married. And she's Italian, so I go to Al-Anon meetings regularly. But she's wonderful. She's wonderful. And tonight, I stopped off and bought one of those big balloons and some candy and some stuff, you know, because tomorrow's Valentine. Guys, did you know tomorrow's Valentine's Day? Go get your stuff. Do it. But you see, what happens is that we have a wonderful relationship. I did not ever expect to get married again. I couldn't even get along with people, so I didn't expect to get along with a wife, for heaven's sakes, and I didn't want a wife. I wanted to live alone. But what happens is that by turning my relationships over to God, God put somebody in my life, and it's the best relationship I've ever had. Now, not everything in my life is wonderful. I have a son who is still, pardon the expression, acting out. He's 33 going on 12, if you know what I mean, and he's got a couple of children, my grandkids, who frankly aren't being taken care of as well as they ought to be. And it's hard for me to watch that, and it's hard for my wife to watch that, because we love those grandkids and we'd like to see them better taken care of. But we turned that over to God. And they're living in a safe place today, and they weren't before. And even though I don't get to spend as much time with them as I would like to, I see strong evidence that my grandkids are being cared for in ways that I couldn't possibly provide. So the message I want to convey to you tonight is something that I learned while I was down at Central Office one time. Let me tell you about that story quickly. There was a fellow, when I first went to Central Office, he had to be trained to answer those phones, and I was down there receiving some training. Alan Fudge and Ed Dorbeck were the guys that were training me, and they're a couple of lunatics anyway, so you get an idea right away that I'm in trouble if they're going to train me. Well, there was a guy that called in on a regular basis whose name was Gary. Gary, it turns out, had grown up in an alcoholic home, and so he had read the big book cover to cover and memorized most of it. And he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he used to call between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock every single night. He would call and argue with whoever was handling Central Office. Okay? And I'm a new kid on the block, so guess who they give the phone to? Hey, Chris, there's this guy you need to talk to. Try to talk him into not drinking tonight. And I did that night after night after night. Every time I'd go down there, I'd end up talking to Gary. One night, sometime later, maybe 6 months later, I happened to be down there, and I happened to end up there, and the fellow I was supposed to work with wasn't there, and Harvey wasn't there, and nobody was there. It was just me. And the phones are ringing off the hook, and so I'm answering the phones, telling people where to go to meetings and stuff like that, and I was having a pretty good time, and the phone rings. It's between 8 and 9 o'clock. I pick up the phone, and it's Gary. Hi, Chris. How you doing tonight? Hi, Gary. Listen, I'm really busy. I don't have time to talk tonight, I said. Oh, Chris, he says, listen, just tell me the message, and then I'll hang up. So I said to myself, I'm going to tell the message. That's what I'm going to do. I'll tell him the message. The message, I said, Gary, is this, that for years I drank and I couldn't control my drinking. And I got so desperate that I tried to kill myself. And then I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything has been wonderful ever since. And I knew I was lying through my teeth. But you see, that was the message that I thought I was supposed to convey. And Gary, this drunk, whom I have since met, and who cannot remember what he said that night because he was in a blackout. This is what he said to me. He said, no, I don't think that's the message. Now, I could have killed him. I'm sober. I'm at central office. I am the big shot here. Maybe not president of AA, but I'm the big shot. I am the mouthpiece, the spokesman of A&A. And this dude is drunk, high, and an idiot, and he's calling me up and telling me that I don't know what the message is. I could have climbed down that telephone line, wrapped it around his neck, and strangled him. I was so angry at him. But what I said was, what's the message, Gary? And what he said was, I thought the message was that you had a spiritual awakening as the result of working these steps. And I got it. I got it. From a drunk in a blackout, I got the message. That's it. That's the message. The message is that I have had a spiritual awakening as the result of working these steps. By working the steps, some wonderful things have happened to me in my life, but the most powerful one of all is that I have had a spiritual awakening. It's as if scales have been removed from my eyes, and I can see tonight very clearly some things that I couldn't see before. I do not have the power to teach myself how to see those things. I can't open my eyes wide enough to see them. I can see tonight that there are people in this room who will kill, if necessary, to keep me sober if they believe I'm sincere. There are people in this room that will go to great lengths to help me stay sober when I need it. And they will help me through my deepest, darkest problems. There are people who will be my sponsors and listen to my horrible stories hours on end. I can call these people at 3 o'clock in the morning and they will answer the phone. They'll be grumpy to begin with, but once they know it's an Alcoholics Anonymous call, they will listen to me. And there are people in this room that are friends of mine. And I have learned to see that what I'm really looking at when I look at the faces in this room is the very face of God. What in the Hebrew language is called the Shekinah. I know that today is absolutely what I am looking at. And maybe most important of all, not only has my eyesight been improved, but my hearing has too. It's as if I've gotten George's hearing aid. And I'm able to hear today the voice of God in the messages that I hear. I don't know if you got it, but I got God speaking today when Dina was talking about her story. She probably doesn't realize that. But she was showing us in real graphic terms what it's like to come to grips with the fact that we are alcoholics. I heard it when Helen was talking tonight. 4 years sober, just quit smoking, going through a little of that, that we go through. But God is in her life, and I can see that, and I can see it in your life. Tomorrow's Valentine's. I love you very much. God be with you all.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control is connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.